With the explosion in soybean plantings in South Africa over the past couple of years, the soybean industry is now also stepping onto our screen. Today, Plaas TV is officially launching its soybean focus with an overview of the industry. We've named it Bean in the Bonnet, and if this strikes your fancy, you don't want to miss today's insightful panel discussion with role players in the industry about this boom in the market. Let's just switch over to Lisa Roberts for the news first, so stay tuned.
In today's news, the commodity derivatives market of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange experienced a productive first quarter in 2021. The overall value traded up by 21% compared to the same period last year. This follows the trend of global commodity prices being well supported. The total contracts traded remained at over 800,000 for the quarter. They did, however, reflect a small decline of 3.8% compared to the same period in 2020. Keep your eyes peeled for an interview with Dr. Raphael Kurwai on Plaas TV in the coming weeks. A first-of-its-kind online grain trading platform was launched this month. Dubbed Ton Up, this platform will trade mainly in wheat, maize, soybean and sunflower seed. Commodities and byproducts of grain commodities now also have a formal trading space. This includes sugar beans, soya oil cake, sunflower oil cake and grain chop. According to Ton Up Director Stephen Kruger, this platform will not replace trading on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. En die plaaslike wolmark het van dese week na 'n 2-week blaaskans hervat. Die mark het met 3,4% gedaal om teen R155,63 per kilogram te sluit. Altesaam 12.231 bale is aangebied, nadat 1.153 bale voor die aanvang van die veiling onttrek is. Die algehele verkoopspersentasie was 93,15%. Die mark het Australië nagevolg wat 1,15% laer teenoor hulle vorige veiling gesluit het. Die sterke rand teenoor die Amerikaanse dollar het ook bygedra tot die daling. Dit het aanleiding gegee tot 'n daling van 1,4% in dollar terme. Bly ingeskakel, net hierna 'n gesprek oor soja.
Netafim, grow more with less.
It is the first episode of our soybean focus on Farm TV, and we really do have a bean in our bonnet. The stage is set for an excellent soybean season, the largest crop ever in the history of South Africa. But this boom in the industry has a backstory and quite a few hurdles as well. This is what we will be discussing with our two guests in studio today, Dr. Dirk Strydom, of course we know him, and Dr. Erhard Briedenhann as well. Good morning, gentlemen. Welcome. Dirk, let's start with you. South Africa is a maize producer, and we are one of the best production countries, even if it's not, can I call it, the best. Why the focus then on a higher soybean production?
Yeah, I think what we've seen over time is with our maize production is, like you said, we achieved good yields and we have achieved good productions, which made that we constantly were net exporters. And then what you need to do is you need to create a commodity balance in the whole system. And that's where soybean came in and played a very important role. But that's not just in terms of markets as well. To be a good overall crop producer, you need to have a good soil balance and you need to have good soil health as well. And soybean is an excellent rotation crop in this whole production system, assisting us to create better soil health characteristics. And also the rotation with soybeans give extra benefits for better maize crop as well. So it's not just a market balance, but it's got good production influences as well. And that's why soybean was such a great crop for us in the whole system. And it's a worldwide phenomenon between the relationship between a maize and a soybean production system.
Now, just paint a picture with regards to the production and consumption of soybeans in South Africa. How much is locally produced and how much is important? And does that include oil cake?
Yeah, so the oilseed, we call it the oilseed complex, is always a very complex thing to understand, because it's a product that you produce that got different byproducts that's used to, again, like maize is a more commodity that's processed, and then you get the products out of that. So with the soybeans, if we look at a production like you mentioned this year, the expectation of the crop estimate is that we're going to have a fairly large crop in the order of 1.7 million tons, which was great for us to see, and to see that the farmers are adopting soybeans a lot more in the production system. Obviously the markets are playing a big role. The prices are looking very good, so that helps a lot in terms of introducing soybeans even more. On the consumption side, we increased the consumption of over the last few years a lot. A big drive of that is the animal side and the animal protein consumption side, where they pick up a lot of this in terms of the consumption. So if we look at what the expectations for the new season is, the NMC is doing that expectations, and they're looking at that we going to consume in an order of 1.5 million tons of the soybeans that we're going to consume just for oil cake purposes, and then around about 210 that's going to go directly into animal feed as full fat. So that is a promising scenario for us going forward. But in terms of your question of imports, we're still importing oil cake. It depends on the season and it depends what is available, but it ranges here about 300 to 400,000 tons that we still import in terms of oil cake. And that's mostly for consumption on the coastal sides. And that's due to the competition between the transport from inland to the coastal sides, given what can be imported. So in the industry, there's an enormous focus to see how can we improve on that. It's not just a quick improvement. It involves infrastructure, involves more efficiency in terms of transport. But that is a focus looking forward. The imports decreased a lot over the last few years, and that is due to a lot of role players coming together, doing analysis, looking at qualities, looking at productions in animal feed, and making sure that our oil cake is of good value. And that's where we are today, stating that we've got a good industry. We've got an industry which utilizes local. There's a few hurdles, like you mentioned, that we need to come over, and the vision is that sometimes in the future we want to get to a space where we totally self-sufficient and we'll have the minimal imports. But yeah, we're working on that side.
Erhard, now when it comes to you usually focus on cultivar technology and development in South Africa. Is that up to date compared to other countries, or do we still have to rely heavily on inputs from elsewhere?
I think it's important to put it into context. South Africa produces less than 1% of the world's soybeans. So it's natural that we will rely on technology developed in the larger volume producing countries. I like to use the analogy, if you allow me, of a Mercedes-Benz. We don't need to manufacture and produce one in South Africa if we can import the parts and assemble it here. And going into the future, it's very important that we have that technology here that comes from other major producing countries, and also even more important to keep up to date with the changes in technology that happen on an annual basis, and that's very important for us to get our yields up where they need to be.
Now we are aware of a strategy to boost our soybean production in South Africa. Stay with us, we'll be back shortly and we'll talk about that.
Goeiemôre kykers. Grane en oliesade het die afgelope week redelik swaar getrek op die termynmarkte vir lewering in Julie. Wit en geel mieliepryse is met 0,5% laer, terwyl die koringprys 1,3% af is van verlede week. Sonneblom en sojabone het onderskeidelik met 3,6 en 2,7% in pryse gedaal. Die daling in pryse is grootliks as gevolg van laer internasionale pryse, as ook die versterking van die rand. Die oliepryse het die afgelope week met 5,3% gestyg. En dit is as gevolg van veral Amerika en China se ekonomieë wat redelik goed doen, en dis die vrese vir derde COVID-19 golwe bietjie besweer. Die rand het hom egter baie goed gedra teenoor vernaamste geldeenhede die laaste week, 2,3% sterker teenoor die dollar, 2,1% sterker teenoor die pond wat onder die R20 is en 1,6% sterker teenoor die euro.
NutriFeeds, die formule vir sukses.
Welcome back to our discussion on our local soybean production. Dirk, Grain SA has a strategy regarding the boost in the soybean industry. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think part of the Grain SA strategy is that we want as much as possible crops produced in South Africa, as I mentioned, to get that basket of different commodities in balance. But it's actually a whole industry strategy, and I think that was the beauty of the soybean story and scenario. It is really the whole value chain that came together, that sit together and said, how do we make this industry better going forward? And I think you've spoken about the cultivars. One of the strategies was when we set together, soybeans is an open pollinated crop, which means that you can hold back your produce and then you can clean it up and you can use it as seed production going forward. And that made seed companies reluctant to bring in new seed technology into the system, because they lose their return on investment. They only get it in the first year. And there we were sitting with the whole industry to say, how do we overcome this challenge? We looked at international scenarios. What is the international world doing regarding that? And that's one of the strategies that was put in place to make sure that we're up to date with new technology, we're up to date with new cultivars. And if you look at the South African scenario, we did a lot in terms of production. Our yields increased vastly over the last few years. A big part of it is learning the production practices of soybeans. A lot of the soybeans were not necessarily planted on the best soils, and that changed over time as producers realized the value of it. They started to use it with fertilizers. They started to use it with good agriculture practices. And they've learned how to plant the soybeans as well and get the most out of it. The next hurdle now is to get the cultivars up as well. We've seen that our yields did not increase the same amount as the international market, and that's where we said we need to go and look at that technology. And agriculture system is complex. You can use chemicals, you can use methods to control weeds, and you get resistance at some point of stage. So if you're not up to date and in trend with the rest of the world, you're lacking behind, and in some pace, at some time you get into a deadlock system. So that was very important. So this is a very long future strategy in terms of production, but given that the whole value chain's got strategies as well, working with the uptakers, the consumers like chickens, all those type of different industries, making sure that we've got a demand and that we continuously grow the demand in South Africa as well, to make sure that we've got a demand here, because you first want to utilize a crop inside the country, and then if there's bulk, then you look at export.
Dirk, at the end of the day on a farm, it's all about the bottom line. So how profitable is it for a farmer, I mean, compared to maize?
Yeah, we know commodities are very volatile. So commodity prices differ, and each commodity differ on its own in terms of volatility. So it changes from year to year. I think, like I mentioned, the combination of the two that you mentioned, maize and soybeans, the combination are working very good in that regard. And it's also a method of risk spreading between the different commodities. But what I can say is, in the current environment, what we're looking at, and if we see the international markets as it is now, the soybeans is a good, valuable crop to plant, and it competes very good in terms of profitability with the rest of the commodities. And that's why we see the large uptake in the market currently as well. We've seen it to the predicament of some of the other commodities. So we've seen inland soybeans have replaced a lot of the traditional crops like wheat and those type of crops because of that profitability competitiveness. The challenge still with the profitability is if we look at the crops, depending on the regions, we still look for a bit of a stability. So the yields need to create a bit of a stability, because we see one year you get great yields and the next year you don't obtain that good yields. And that's part of this whole cultivar technology, cultivar driven parts as well. It's not necessarily always higher yields, but it's in some cases more stable yields as well. But to answer you, profitability wise, it's competing very well.
At this stage, very well. Yeah. Erhard, what does the processing capacity for soya in South Africa look like?
I think it's important to look at the history of the processing capacity. If we go back 15 years ago, we only had capability to process a few 100,000 tons. And that's grown dramatically. We were wondering whether it's a chicken or the egg, but the processing capacity grew before the production of soybeans did, so which was a very positive thing for the industry. It was a leap of faith by the processors, and that made a very big contribution to the future of the industry. The capacity at the moment is approximately 2.2 million tons of solvent extracted capacity, but that includes dual plants which can change between various other oil seeds and soybeans. One's also got to keep in mind that there is 300,000 to 400,000 tons of full fat soya capacity available as well, which is for the animal feed market directly, although the oil cake is as well. And then there is a product called an expeller meal, which is not a solvent extracted meal, and there's also between 100 and 200,000 tons of processing capacity. Let's also keep in mind that the soya into the human food chain is becoming more and more popular, and that's a very positive step into the future. Currently, we're only between 30 and 50,000 tons of soybeans that goes into that market, but there are very positive signs that market will also grow going into the future, and particularly into school feeding schemes where protein is such a critical component. So we look forward to that growing in the future.
Well, stay with us. After the break, we'll throw a spanner in the works. Welcome back. We are talking about our local soya bean production, and the highlight was obviously this year. We are throwing a spanner in the works like the JSE did, and that is all about, Dirk, location differential. Yes, always a headache.
Yeah, it's always a headache, and it's always something we try to improve. So, yeah, like you mentioned, that the JSE introduced a soybean differential, and that was at that point of stage we felt it was not necessary, because it was one specific market condition that evolved in terms of introducing something like that. The biggest question on our side is the methodology currently used, is it still relevant given the market structures we have and the change over the last 20 years? So yeah, we're busy with the JSE and investigating an alternative that's more related to the physical market and that simulates what's happening in the physical cash market. And we're hopeful that can be introduced in the future. We think it is a possible solution, getting the differential closer to what the real reality is in the field.
Erhard, and then on the other side, we've got the levies. Why are they necessary?
It's critical that South Africa stays up to date with the new technology that's being used elsewhere in the world in the major producing countries. But the problem that we have, there's a lot of retained seed. So these companies producing this technology need an incentive to bring their technology to South Africa. And the technology levy has gone a very long way and been very positively received, making a massive contribution to us receiving new technology to increase our yields.
During the introduction and our discussion, we spoke to Erhard also about do we still rely heavily on other countries? So yes, he said we do, because we are a very small player in the industry. What can we learn from other countries?
Yeah, I think if you look at just seed production, the seed production all over the world, the technology in terms of data science changed so big that you can literally change genetics in terms of what is good cultivars working where, under what conditions, and given the international space and the availability of data, you can literally customize it to a country to say, this is the type of cultivars that can work in a country, and then you just need to bring it to the country and finalize in a country how the specifics work in the country. So given that platform, with the international market at play, you get a lot of data and you get a lot of new access to new gene pools that we didn't have in South Africa necessarily. So one example was we recently had a showcasing of the trials that's currently in place for registration purposes. And one of the big international companies explained in Brasilia, they use 80% of the production is based on the new technology that's not available in South Africa. And only 20% is on the older technology. And the reason for the 20% is they need to do that for regulation purposes and to make sure that there's no cross-pollinations taking place. So we need to follow the trend of the world as well in that regard, to make sure that we will be able to produce in the future. So suddenly we only had access to a 20% pool, and with this new introductions we changed the 20% to 80% pool, which means there's a lot more opportunities to improve conditions in South Africa. And we've seen in the South African environment, and on the eastern side of the country we started to establish good cultivars, but on the western side we're still learning in terms of what cultivars really works there. And like I said, the stability of yields is a very important thing that we need to establish.
Anything you'd like to add?
Yes, I think also we must bear in mind that the lessons that have been learned from other countries are across the board, even in terms of agronomy. If we look at fertilizers were mentioned, rhizobia, different other different types of technology that are being applied there and used there are so important that we fetch that technology and use it here in South Africa, because we can learn a lot from countries that have been doing this for a long time, and it's very important that we follow that pattern.
Gentlemen, in closing, Erhard, what are the biggest challenges you think as far as our local production and the industry is concerned, and how can we overcome this? Just very briefly.
Well, certainly from a processing point of view, the lack of water and electricity, but that belongs to everybody else in the country as well. But I think it was mentioned earlier on that 20 to 30% of our soybean meal market is in the Western Cape. And we need our processing capacity is inland, and we need to move the product down there. So logistics is also one of the challenges for the future that we'll face.
Dirk?
Yeah, I think in terms of the whole system is the markets, finding the markets. As production increases, you must always increase the markets as well. And if it's in the human market or in the animal market or external markets in terms of export, we must make sure we're not caught off guard in terms of that as production increases. And then there's a lot of things still in terms of producing stability, in terms of quality stability. The moment you increase markets, that type of things in the supply chain starts to become very important things. If you talk exports, the export market want a constant quality. They don't want variability. So that's the type of things we're going to look at in the future and need to spend a lot of time into it, given our production increases. So we become from a small market now to a lot bigger market. And with a bigger market, there's a lot more different characteristics that start to play. And I think that the beauty of this is we as a value chain envisioned this already. So we're not reactive, we're proactive in this. And that's the beauty of this whole value chain, where in other value chains we're sometimes reactive rather than proactive.
Well, gentlemen, thank you for being part of the bean in our bonnet here at Farm TV. This is not going to be the end. This is only the start. So we will see you again.
Thank you very much.
Been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. And to all of you out there, thank you for joining us. We're going to have more discussions this year on Farm TV on our local soybean production and the industry. And yes, thank you for joining us and becoming part of the bean in our bonnet.